Blood is supposed to run thicker than water, but for 18-year-old Chloe Gallagher, it was the very thing that put her under. Stripped of everything by her own father and cast into the freezing dark, her sole inheritance was a rusted key to a cabin nobody wanted. What she found inside that cabin rewrote her entire life. Rain hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Gallagher estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, smearing the manicured grounds into a wash of formless gray. Chloe Gallagher stood trembling in the middle of the mahogany-paneled study, her canvas duffel pressed tight to her chest like a shield. It was her 18th birthday. No cake, no singing, no warmth of any kind, just the cold, unblinking stare of her father, Richard Gallagher, CEO of Gallagher Global Logistics. "You made your choice, Chloe," Richard said through his teeth, tugging at the cuffs of his tailored Brioni suit. He wasn't looking at his daughter, he was looking at a write-off. Quote 1. By the roaring fireplace, Beatrice, Chloe's stepmother, stood with a glass of expensive Pinot Noir balanced between manicured fingers. A barely concealed smirk tugged at her mouth. "Richard, darling, don't work yourself up. You always knew it would come to this. She's her mother through and through. Headstrong, reckless, ungrateful." Chloe bit down on the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. "My mother helped build half this company before you forced her out, Dad. And Grandpa Nathaniel—" "Do not speak his name in this house." Richard's fist crashed into the antique desk. Crystal tumblers jumped and rattled. The violence in his voice sent Chloe a full step backward. __quote _5 __. He snatched a heavy brass letter opener, used it to push a small, faded manila envelope across the polished mahogany surface. It slid right off the edge, landed with a soft, pathetic slap at Chloe's worn canvas sneakers. "There's the deed to his cabin," Richard continued. His voice dropped to something worse than shouting. A flat, absolute calm. "It's in your name now. As of this moment, your trust fund is dissolved. Credit cards cancelled. Phone plan deactivated. You are no longer part of this family. You are no longer a Gallagher. Leave my house before I have private security drag you off the property." Chloe crouched down. Her fingers shook so badly she nearly couldn't grip the envelope. Inside lay a single iron key, heavy and mottled with decades of rust. It belonged to the cabin where her grandfather, Nathaniel Gallagher, had spent the last 10 years of his life in isolation. Nathaniel had been a brilliant logistics engineer, a man who forged a shipping empire from nothing, then walked away from all of it without explanation, surrendering the company to Richard. He died when Chloe was 14. His final will stated explicitly that the cabin would transfer to Chloe on her 18th birthday. Richard had fought it in probate court for 4 brutal years, arguing the land was prime real estate belonging to the corporation. Then, mysteriously, he dropped the $1 million lawsuit just days ago. Chloe refused to cry in front of them. She turned her back on the only home she'd ever known, walked through the massive oak doors, and stepped into the freezing October rain. Her canvas bag landed in the back seat of her beat-up 1998 Subaru Outback, the single possession in her name that Richard couldn't legally touch. The wrought iron gates of the estate shrank in her rearview mirror, and then the adrenaline drained out of her like a plug had been pulled. What replaced it was hollow, suffocating, raw panic. She pulled onto the highway shoulder and opened her banking app. $412 in checking. Half a tank of gas. Nowhere on earth to go. The drive from Connecticut into the deep, unforgiving wilderness of the Adirondacks stretched 6 brutal hours. The massive interstates gave way to narrow state roads, then to rutted logging trails hemmed in by towering, leafless pines. Her grandfather had been her only real anchor in that family. Richard demanded flawless obedience. Beatrice poisoned every room she entered. But Nathaniel had been shelter. He taught Chloe to whittle, to read the night sky, to see what others refused to look for. Quote 8. He'd say, eyes lit with that quiet knowing sadness. Nobody ever thinks to check what's underneath. By the time her headlights caught the dull glint of a rusted mailbox tilting hard to one side, the forest had swallowed every last trace of daylight. Faded white numbers, 842, Hollow Creek Road. She turned onto a driveway choked with weeds and loose gravel, tires slipping through mud. The cabin materialized from the dark like something forgotten on purpose. It was worse than anything she'd prepared herself for. The roof buckled under layers of soaked pine needles. Porch steps had rotted clean through. Ivy, thick, relentless, had consumed half the timber walls. This was it, her grand inheritance, a collapsing shack in the dead center of nowhere. For one raw, crushing moment, Chloe folded over the steering wheel and wept. Maybe Richard had been right. Maybe Nathaniel really had lost his mind. Morning light pierced the pine canopy, throwing long, dusty shafts across the cabin's gutted living room. Chloe woke shaking on a moth-eaten canvas couch, a thin wool blanket from her trunk cinched around her shoulders. Daylight made everything worse. Dust blanketed every surface in thick sheets. Floorboards bowed underfoot. The air hung heavy with mildew, damp soil, and rotting paper. She spent the first hours ripping down curtains of cobwebs, dragging waterlogged furniture out onto the front lawn. Her stomach snarled, a pointed reminder of how little money she had left. She needed to know if the 20 acres could be sold, or at the very least, whether she could insulate this wreck enough to survive winter. Around midday, the sharp crunch of boots on gravel stopped her cold. Close pulse slammed against her ribs. She grabbed a heavy iron fire poker from the stone hearth and moved toward the front window, squinting through filthy glass. A tall man in a red flannel and a worn canvas jacket stood by her Subaru, studying the Connecticut plates. She shoved the door open, poker tucked behind her leg. Then, steadier than she felt. The man flinched and spun around. Weathered face, hands roughened by years of labor. Hazel eyes, unexpectedly gentle. She said carefully, stepping onto the groaning porch boards. Tobias let out a slow whistle, pulling off his faded cap and running a hand through dark hair. Her fingers locked around the doorframe, knuckles bone white. Tobias said, shifting his weight. The air left Chloe's lungs. Richard had dropped the probate suit. He'd handed her the deed yesterday, because he knew she was broke and would come running straight here. But why dispatch a demolition crew before she'd even taken possession? If the cabin was genuinely worthless, why pour tens of thousands into flattening it immediately? Tobias, Chloe said slowly, her thoughts spiraling towards something terrifying. Did they get inside the cabin? Tried to, Tobias answered, gesturing at the front door. But Nathaniel bolted solid steel reinforced doors underneath the wood paneling back in 2012. You'd need an industrial blowtorch or the master key to breach them. The crew got frustrated. They were planning to just level the entire structure with an excavator next Tuesday and pick through the debris. Chloe swallowed hard. Thank you, Tobias. I think I need to be alone right now to work this out. After Tobias departed, promising her the neighbors looked out for one another, Chloe sealed the heavy door behind him. Her mind was a storm. Her grandfather hadn't simply withdrawn into the woods. He had turned this cabin into a fortress. She tore through the room with frantic energy, exhaustion obliterated by raw adrenaline. Old wooden bookshelves emptied, kitchen cabinets stripped bare, loose rotting rugs ripped from the floor. There had to be a reason Richard needed this specific place reduced to dust so desperately. He didn't care about the dense wooded acreage. He wanted something buried. Hours bled away. Caked in soot, drenched in sweat, draped in cobwebs, Chloe crumpled onto the floorboards before the massive stone fireplace. She stared at the blackened bricks, defeated. Her grandfather's cryptic phrase circled back again. The world only sees the paint, Chloe. They never bother to check the canvas. She fished the rusted key from her pocket. It had turned the front lock without resistance, but now, studying it in the pale sunlight, something nagged at her. The shaft was unusually long, the teeth intricate, asymmetrical, absurdly complex, far too sophisticated for a standard deadbolt. Chloe crawled toward the massive hearth, dragging trembling fingers along the cold, rough stones. She recalled Nathaniel's obsession with masonry. "Stones hold deep memories," he used to say. She pressed into the thick mortar lines. Nothing. She shifted to the heavy wooden mantelpiece, scanning the hand-carved panorama. Pine trees, bears, wolves, all whittled by Nathaniel's own hands. Then she stopped. The wolf on the far right edge. Its eye was a void. Perfectly round, impossibly deep, unlike any of the other carvings. Chloe held her breath. With shaking hands, she raised the rusted key and guided it into the wooden wolf's eye. It glided in without friction. A perfect fit. She turned it right. A deep mechanical clack reverberated from somewhere behind the stone wall. The entire right section of brickwork began swinging inward on concealed heavy-duty steel hinges, exposing a dark, narrow concrete staircase that plunged straight down beneath the cabin's foundation. A wave of stale, freezing air struck her face. She pulled out her phone, switched on the LED flashlight, and gripped the iron fire poker tight in her right fist. One terrifying step at a time, she descended into total blackness. The basement bore no resemblance to the rotten cabin above, not even close. Perfectly preserved, immaculately clean. Lined with thick, bunker-grade concrete walls, high-end dehumidifiers hummed softly in the corners, still operational on some independent power grid. At the center of the vast space stood a massive, state-of-the-art server rack. Faint green and blue lights pulsed across its face, wired into a sprawling off-grid solar battery bank. But it wasn't the glowing servers that made Chloe release the heavy iron fire poker. It hit the concrete floor with a sharp clang. Against the far wall, 10 wooden pallets, stacked with precision. Hundreds of heavy, olive-green canvas bags sat atop them. One bag had toppled, spilling its contents across the floor. Heavy, gleaming gold Krugerrand coins caught her phone's light. Millions of dollars in untraceable physical wealth. And there, at the room's center, spread across a massive steel drafting table, hundreds of highly classified blueprints, legal contracts, surveillance photographs. Pinned to the middle of a large corkboard was a high-resolution image of her father, Richard Gallagher, shaking hands with a notorious, internationally sanctioned arms dealer. Across Richard's smiling face, someone had dragged a thick red marker in a vicious, jagged X. Underneath that nightmare of a photograph, scrawled in her grandfather's urgent but razor-precise hand, sat a massive leather ledger. This wasn't some record of shipping lanes or cargo manifests. This was a catalog of illegal arms deals, political bribes funneled to sitting senators, exact transit routes for contraband moving through Gallagher Logistics' shadow corridors across the globe. Nathaniel hadn't lost his mind. He had uncovered the truth. His own son had gutted the family empire from the inside, hollowing it into a front for an international criminal syndicate. And Nathaniel had spent his final decade alive quietly constructing the ultimate dead man's switch, something no one could dismantle. Chloe moved toward the desk. Her reflection slid across the dark face of a computer monitor. She lifted a thick, leather-bound journal positioned precisely atop the ledger. The cover bore a single sentence stamped deep into the hide, gleaming in bright gold leaf. For Chloe, use the gold to survive, and use the truth to burn his empire to the ground. She hadn't merely been cast out, she'd been forged into a weapon. Ice-cold adrenaline crashed through her bloodstream as she stood before the glowing terminal in that underground vault. The blinking green cursor on the oversized curved Dell display pulsed like a heartbeat. Nathaniel had engineered this digital guillotine with terrifying precision, but the entire system sat locked behind military-grade encryption. One prompt waited at the center of the black screen. Identify the canvas. Chloe dropped into the heavy Herman Miller chair. Her thoughts spiraled backward to those summers on the porch overhead, whittling wood beside him. The world only sees the fresh paint, Chloe. They never bothered to check the canvas underneath. Her fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard, shaking. What was the canvas? She cycled through his beloved paintings, his worn books, those old nautical charts pinned to the wall. Then a memory surfaced. The afternoon he taught her to grind minerals into pigment, mixing them with linseed oil. He'd painted a clumsy little sailboat on rough canvas, then flipped it over and scratched a date on the back. The day her mother died. Her fingers struck the keys. August 1st, 2006. The screen blazed red. Access denied. 2 attempts remaining. Terror seized her throat. A localized security system like this failed the password and the hard drive could wipe itself clean. She shut her eyes, tried to summon the exact carving etched into the fireplace upstairs. The wolf, the blinded eye. His voice returned. Your father builds cages, Chloe. I build keys. Her eyes snapped open. The canvas wasn't a painting at all. The canvas was a foundation. The foundation beneath Gallagher Global Logistics itself. She typed the original incorporation date, followed by the name of his first cargo vessel. 1978, Providence. The screen erupted into solid, brilliant blue. A progress bar streaked across the monitor. Then thousands of nested folders cascaded onto the desktop like an avalanche. Chloe clicked the master directory, labeled The Carthage Files. What filled the screen made her stomach lurch violently. Nathaniel hadn't gathered whispers and suspicions. He had intercepted and archived terabytes of internal corporate communications, banking ledgers, encrypted satellite imagery. She opened a folder marked Antwerp Customs. High-resolution photographs showed Gallagher shipping containers, officially loaded with heavy agricultural equipment destined for Eastern Europe, being cracked open by paramilitary units. Invoices traced payment chains through phantom shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. A separate document titled Project Chimera laid bare how Richard circumvented federal export controls by dismantling advanced drone systems and shipping individual components disguised as civilian automotive parts. She had to copy everything. Now. She tore through the drawers of the steel drafting table until her hand closed around a heavy, rubberized Kingston iron key flash drive. She jammed it into the terminal and launched a mass data transfer. A progress bar materialized. Estimated time, 14 minutes. Then a sound from the world above. The heavy, unmistakable slam of a vehicle door. Chloe went rigid. Security monitors bolted above the server rack blinked awake. Exterior cameras, concealed inside birdhouses and hollow tree trunks, revealed a sleek black Cadillac Escalade parked aggressively across the front lawn. These were not the scrapyard thugs Tobias had warned her about. 4 figures emerged from the vehicle, dressed in crisp, dark tactical gear, moving in lockstep like a unit that had rehearsed violence. Leading them was a face Chloe knew from her father's corporate galas, Victor Sterling. On paper, Vice President of Risk Management at Gallagher Logistics. In practice, Richard's personal fixer. The man you called when a multi-million-dollar problem needed to stop existing. Victor drew a suppressed pistol from his shoulder holster. He pointed 2 of his men toward the cabin's perimeter. Chloe stared at the monitor, paralyzed. The data transfer sat at 30%. Above her, the floorboards screamed. A steel battering ram slammed into the reinforced front door. Thud, thud, crack. Splintering wood rang down the concrete stairwell. Then came the heavy, deliberate footsteps of Victor Sterling crossing the living room. Tear the place apart! His voice filtered down the shaft, flat, muffled, surgical. Richard said the old man was paranoid. Look for false walls, floor safes, anything unusual. A pause. And if the girl is here, you know the protocol. Chloe's chest seized. The protocol. Her own father had signed off on eliminating her. The progress bar dragged itself to 70%. Overhead, furniture shattered, books hit the floor, floorboards were pried loose one by one. It was a countdown until they examined the massive stone fireplace. One of the mercenaries spoke on the monitor feed. Victor's face filled the hidden camera frame. "Find the release mechanism. Get a sledgehammer from the truck." Chloe couldn't wait. At 92%, she ripped the Kingston drive from the USB port. Whatever she had would have to be enough. She jammed the drive into her pocket, seized Nathaniel's leather ledger, and unzipped the canvas duffel. She dumped her clothes onto the concrete and started fisting heavy gold Krugerrand coins into the bag. Roughly 40 pounds before it became impossible to carry. Enough to survive. She needed an exit. Her eyes swept the bunker walls. There, behind the massive server rack, half buried under thick bundles of Ethernet cables. A heavy circular steel hatch. Nathaniel would never have built a panic room without a second way out. She ran for it, hauling the duffel across her shoulder. She grabbed the rusty iron wheel and cranked. It shrieked, metal grinding on metal. Upstairs, Victor froze. "Did you hear that? Beneath the floor. Blow the hinges on the fireplace. Now!" Chloe threw every ounce of her weight into the wheel. The rust seal cracked. The hatch swung wide, revealing a dark, narrow, corrugated metal pipe angling downward into raw earth. She dove in head first, dragging the bag of gold behind her. A massive explosion tore through the cabin above. Dust and concrete rained into the bunker as the secret door was blasted apart. Chloe clawed down the pitch-black tunnel, knees shredding against cold, jagged metal. The pipe stretched endlessly. The air turned damp, thick with the smell of iron and wet clay. Behind her, furious shouts. Victor's men pouring into the bunker. __, quote 31 __. Victor's roar echoed down the pipe like a gunshot. "Find the tunnel exit. Call Richard. Tell him the asset has gone rogue." Chloe pushed harder. Her lungs burned white. Then, a faint razor of moonlight ahead. She forced through a heavy grate buried in blackberry thicket, tumbling into freezing mud on the forest floor. Roughly 200 yards from the cabin, down near the edge of the roaring creek. She did not look back. She crushed the bag of gold against her ribs and ran, plunging through dense, merciless woods, letting the rush of the water swallow her footsteps. The shadow war had officially begun. Rain slicked the neon-lit streets of Syracuse as Chloe pulled the Subaru into a dark, forgotten alley behind the crumbling strip mall. 2 full days had passed since the bunker. She'd stayed off every major highway, sleeping in her car with the locks engaged and the tire iron laid across her thighs. Exhausted, starving, painfully aware she was the most wanted woman on the entire East Coast. She tucked the hood of her damp sweatshirt forward and stepped into a bright, barred window shop called Dominic's Gold and Silver. Cheap cigars and ammonia, that's what hit her first. The man behind the bulletproof glass didn't bother looking up from his phone. Chloe pushed 2 heavy Krugerrands through the metal slot. "I need cash, unmarked, small bills." The pawnbroker raised the jeweler's loop to his eye. Something shifted in his expression. __quote 33 ___. Daylight robbery. Those coins were worth nearly 4 times that number. But a legitimate bank meant a paper trail, and the paper trail meant a body bag. __quote 34 ___, she said. No warmth in it. She stuffed a fat brick of 20s into her pockets. From a nearby electronics store, she grabbed a cheap prepaid burner phone and a refurbished Dell laptop. A roadside motel. Cash at the desk. Deadbolt thrown. She sat on the edge of a mattress that sagged like a hammock and powered up the laptop. The Kingston drive slid in with a click. She needed a megaphone, someone with enough reach and enough spine to bring a multi-billion-dollar empire to its knees without getting buried in the process. Hours of digging through independent investigative journalists. Then she found him. Jonathan Reed, Pulitzer-winning senior correspondent for the Sentinel, an aggressive independent news bureau out of Washington, D.C. The man had a track record of dismantling corrupt corporate giants, and he never, not once, gave up a source. Through an encrypted email client, she sent one message. I have the Carthage files. Gallagher Global Logistics is a front. Meet me in Philadelphia, 30th Street Station, tomorrow at noon. She attached a single heavily redacted invoice from the Antwerp shipments as proof. 10 minutes. That's all it took. A reply blinked onto her screen. I'll be the guy reading a 1998 copy of Wired magazine. Bring everything. The next afternoon, the soaring vaulted ceilings of 30th Street Station echoed with thousands of rushing commuters. Chloe perched at a small round table beside a busy coffee kiosk, her gaze sweeping the crowd in tight, nervous arcs. She spotted him immediately. Jonathan Reed, late 40s, rumpled tweed jacket, the vintage magazine in hand, exactly as promised. She rose, grabbed her coffee, and walked past his table. A small folded napkin dropped beside his elbow. It read, "Follow me to the Amtrak quiet car, train 84. 10 minutes later, the train groaned forward, pulling free of the station. Chloe took a window seat, the heavy canvas bag pressed against her shins. Jonathan settled into the seat across from her. His eyes were sharp, assessing. "You're Richard Gallagher's kid," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "The one who just got disowned. Tabloids can't stop talking about you." "The tabloids don't know a thing." Chloe slid the encrypted laptop across the narrow table. "My grandfather spent the last decade of his life building this archive. Richard is moving military-grade hardware for sanctioned cartels and paramilitary groups across Eastern Europe and Africa." Jonathan opened the laptop, started scrolling through the decrypted files. For a long stretch, the only sound was steel wheels hammering rail joints. Color bled from the veteran journalist's face, slowly, then all at once. Jonathan breathed, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Chloe's fingers pressed white against the table's edge. Jonathan didn't respond right away. His focus had narrowed to a specific chain of offshore bank routing numbers laid out in Nathaniel's ledger. He reached into his own bag, pulled out a specialized reference drive, and began cross-referencing the digits. Quote underscore 45 underscore. Jonathan spoke slowly, lifting his gaze to meet hers with an expression that could freeze blood. Quote underscore 46 underscore. Chloe's brow furrowed. She pulled the laptop closer. "Then who owns them?" "An entity registered under the name B. Croft Holdings." Jonathan tapped the screen. "Does the name Croft mean anything to you?" The air evacuated from Chloe's lungs. Every drop of warmth drained from her body. Quote 51. Jonathan's voice carried something darker than concern. "He's the puppet. Beatrice is the handler. She was embedded into your father's life to hijack the company from within, to weaponize its global logistics network for her syndicate. Richard disowned you to pull you clear of the blast radius. But he couldn't stop her from unleashing Victor Sterling." Before Chloe could absorb the horror of it, Jonathan's burner phone rattled violently against the table. He glanced down. His eyes blew wide with raw shock. He slammed the laptop shut and seized Chloe's arm. "We're getting off at the next stop." His tone left zero room for debate. "Why? What's going on?" Chloe pulled back hard. Jonathan turned the phone screen toward her. A breaking news banner from CNN filled the display. "Nationwide manhunt. Heiress Chloe Gallagher wanted by the FBI in connection with the brutal murder of Adirondack resident Tobias Hayes and the domestic bombing of a remote mountain cabin. Armed and extremely dangerous." Beatrice hadn't just leveled the cabin. She had killed Tobias, pinned the explosion on Chloe, turned the full weight of the federal government into a weapon aimed at an 18-year-old girl. Chloe watched the landscape smear past the window as the truth locked into place. She wasn't fighting a corrupt CEO anymore. She was at war with an international syndicate, and there was nowhere left to disappear. Rain hammered without mercy against the shattered skylights of a dead textile factory on the edges of North Philadelphia. Jonathan had pulled Chloe off the train 2 stops ahead of schedule, commandeered a delivery truck to reach this forgotten, off-grid refuge. Dust particles floated through thin shafts of streetlight, bleeding through filth-caked glass. Jonathan's fingers flew across a heavy military-grade field laptop, bypassing standard internet providers to patch into an encrypted satellite uplink. Sweat gathered at his temples. Chloe paced the fractured concrete, arms locked tight around herself. The heavy canvas bag of gold slumped in the corner. It felt less like salvation now, more like dead weight. 59. Jonathan struck the enter key. A progress bar materialized on screen, dragging itself toward 2%. Footsteps rose from the factory's lower levels. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Chloe went rigid. Ice flooded her veins. She edged away from the stairwell, eyes sweeping the vast room for anything, a weapon, a tool, something. Nothing but rusted machinery and hollow wooden crates. Jonathan's hands left the keyboard. He reached slowly into his tweed jacket and drew a compact silver revolver. __quote_ 61____. The voice cut through the darkness, cold, echoing, precise. Victor Sterling materialized from the gloom, utterly unbothered by the brutal weather. A suppressed tactical pistol leveled at Jonathan's chest. 2 mercenaries flanked him, rifles raised. Laser sights stitched bright red dots across the journalist's jacket. __quote_ 62___. Chloe's voice shook, but it did not break. How did you find us? You left a digital crater when you pinged that offshore account from the train, Victor said. His face betrayed nothing. He leveled his weapon toward the laptop. Cancel the transfer, now. It's a dead man's switch, Jonathan lied without missing a beat, hands raised. I kill the upload, the data splinters and fires itself to 1,000 random inboxes. Victor smirked and closed the distance. I've called bluffs from men far more dangerous than you. Shoot him. Wait. Chloe threw herself directly between Victor's operatives and Jonathan. Victor, you don't want this. You have no idea who you're actually serving. Victor exhaled a dry, joyless laugh. I work for your father, Chloe, and he is deeply disappointed in you. My father is a puppet, Chloe shouted. Her voice bounced off the brick walls and came back sharp. Beatrice runs the offshore accounts. She runs Beechercroft Holdings. Do you really believe she'll let you walk away when this wraps up? She detonated the cabin. She killed Tobias Hayes. She's erasing loose ends, Victor, and you're the hired help. Victor's eyes tightened, just a fraction. For a man who built his identity on absolute control, the name Beechercroft Holdings landed like a slap. My grandfather didn't just document the shipments, Chloe pressed, reading his hesitation like a pulse. He documented the payouts. Look at the screen, Victor. Look at the routing numbers. Jonathan, catching the signal, reached down and tapped a single key. The display split in 2. Left side, the upload bar crawling past 60%. Right side, a detailed ledger. Massive recurring transfers flowing from Beechercroft Holdings into a private Swiss bank account. That's your retirement fund, isn't it? Chloe asked. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Check the status. Victor squinted at the glowing monitor. The field beside his multi-million-dollar Swiss account pulsed in bright red. Liquidated. Funds routed. She drained your accounts an hour ago, Chloe said quietly. The second we escaped that bunker, Beatrice knew the empire was caving in. She's torching the evidence, Victor. And you're the one holding the match. The factory went dead silent. Only the rain hammered on. The laser sights trained on Jonathan began to tremble. Victor lowered his weapon, barely an inch. His jaw locked so tight the bone looked ready to crack. He drew a slim satellite phone from his jacket and punched speed dial. 10 seconds crawled past. The number you have reached is no longer in service. A robotic voice, flat, final. Beatrice had severed the line. Victor stared at the phone, then at Chloe. The cold, methodical enforcer suddenly looked like a man who just realized he was standing on a landmine. Without a word, he holstered the weapon, signaled his team, and pivoted into the darkness. Gone as fast as he'd materialized. He wasn't going after Beatrice. He was vanishing into the wind. Ding! Chloe and Jonathan spun toward the screen. Solid green. Blazing. Transfer complete. Packets delivered to 412 global addresses.
It's done, Jonathan whispered, sinking into his chair. It's over.
By sunrise, the world Chloe had known lay in pieces. The Carthage files detonated across every major network and digital outlet on Earth. The volume of evidence was beyond dispute. Interpol issued immediate red notices. The FBI descended on Gallagher Logistics corporate headquarters in Manhattan, seizing servers and freezing billions in assets. Richard Gallagher was arrested on the manicured lawn of his Greenwich estate. He looked utterly lost as federal agents locked cuffs around his wrists. He'd been completely blind to the scale of Beatrice's shadow operations, but ignorance offered no legal shield. Beatrice nearly slipped through. She was intercepted on a private tarmac in Teterboro, New Jersey, boarding a Gulf Stream bound for a non-extradition country. When agents searched her luggage, they found millions in bearer bonds and the exact detonator frequency used to destroy Nathaniel's cabin. 1 week later, Chloe stood on the muddy, scorched foundation of her grandfather's destroyed cabin in the Adirondacks. The federal government had publicly exonerated her of all charges, issuing a formal apology and recognizing her as a national whistleblower. The air bit clean and sharp, thick with pine resin and freshly turned soil. Chloe reached into her pocket and closed her fingers around that heavy, rusted key, the only thing the fire hadn't consumed. She'd used the gold Krugerrands to retain the finest environmental lawyers money could buy. Gallagher Logistics was being systematically dismantled, stripped down, and liquidated piece by piece. But those pristine 20 acres of mountain forest, they remained hers.
You were right, Grandpa, Chloe whispered into the wind, her eyes tracing the endless canopy of green stretching toward the horizon.
They didn't check the canvas, but we did. Chloe's path, from a disowned teenager cast into nothing, to the woman who dismantled an international crime syndicate with her bare hands and her grandfather's truth, stands as proof. The truth always claws its way out of the dark. If this story landed somewhere real for you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more. And the gold, what would you have done with it? Tell us in the comments.